Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to part 2 in what is now therefore an ongoing series of videos, Pagani Versus. I started it a few weeks ago with Pagani versus Rolex Explorer 2. Today it's Pagani versus Omega Seamaster Aqua Terra. I've reviewed a bunch of Pagani design homage watches on the channel over the past few years. This, however, is the first time I've been able to compare a homage with an original watch that I actually own. On my wrist is my 2017 model Omega Seamaster Aqua Terra. If you're a regular on the channel, if you've been here for a while, you'll know that this was my engagement watch. It was the watch that my girlfriend, who's now my wife, gave to me the day she became my fiancée, if you see what I mean. Does that mean I'm suddenly now horrified by the concept of homages? How dare they rip off the watch that is on my wrist? No. Absolutely not. In some ways, I'm even more pro-homage given that I know exactly how much money this cost my wife. So today I will do a brief review of the Pagani and then I'll see just how close it gets to the Omega in some areas and which areas it doesn't get anywhere near. Let's flip the camera and get on with it. And there they are, Pagani versus Omega. I'm going to have to be careful in this review not to allow my pro-Omega bias to come through. I think it's much easier for a company like Pagani to copy a Rolex than it is for them to copy an Omega. Rolex tend to be quite simple, you know, flat sapphire crystal, no anti-reflective undercoating, no sunburst in the dial, simple case finishing, etc, etc. Omega are a lot more elaborate than that. Lots of different facets to the dial and the handset, different mixture of brushed and polished, more complex bracelets, etc, etc. In some respects though, the Pagani does replicate the Omega. I think the Omega tends to look a little bit dull from certain angles, but when you catch it at the right light, it looks spectacular. Similarly, the Pagani, especially in this slightly drab grey-black dial finish, it tends to look a little bit dull from certain angles, but when you catch it right and you see those horizontal stripes, that's when it looks like a far more expensive watch than the price tag suggests. These are $100 US. I'll leave a link in the description of the video, obviously. And there they are again. Now, I was quite deliberate in the intro when I mentioned that my Omega was a 2017 model. 2017 was the last year that they used that vertical striping on the dial and a date complication at the 3 o'clock. From 2018 onwards, they switched to horizontal striping on the dial and a date complication at the 6 o'clock. Pagani have kind of split the difference, as you can see. They've gone for that horizontal striping but kept the date at 3. I'm guessing that is for economy. They've also kind of split the difference in terms of sizing as well. This is a 38.5 with 19mm lugs. The larger Aqua Terra option is 41 with, I believe, 21mm lugs. Pagani, they claim it's a 40. I measure it at 40.8, so I'm calling this one as a 41, but they have stuck with 20mm lug width. So 40.8mm in diameter, then call it 41 with 20mm lug width. 46mm lug to lug though, so nice and compact, and that comes in at a scrape under 12mm thick. Now, unlike the Omega, there is quite a bit of taper on this bracelet. It goes from 20 at the lugs. First 2 or 3 links taper and we're down to about 17.5 at the clasp. This one sized up for me weighs in at 137 grams. My Omega sized up for me, smaller case diameter it may be, weighs in at 141 grams. So it's a little bit heavier, but they're pretty close to each other. I'm calling that as a slightly domed sapphire crystal. You can just see some distortion there. Very, very mild dome with a bit of a bevel edge. All stainless case and crown on this one. Screw down crown, 100 meters of water resistance. That's obviously a fixed high polished stainless steel bezel. Now the bracelet, we have solid end links, solid links, again mimicking the Omega. High polished center links here, I'll talk about those a bit later on, and it is a butterfly clasp. However, no half links. So I'm wearing this one loose, as you'll see when I get it on wrist later on. Chances are you'll be wearing it loose as well. Standard of case finishing is very nice. I think that's one thing that Pagani does really well, is the standard of brushing and or polishing on a case. It even has that kind of super fine brush, just like the Aqua Terra. It also has those kind of curly twisted lugs. Screw down, high polished Pagani branded crown. It's a bit small. I'll talk about that later as well. Similarly, the standard of brushing on the outer links of the bracelet is pretty good as well. High polished center links. Now you notice that my Omega does not have high polished center links anymore. I got them brushed out because they were just a bit too shiny for me. So do bear that in mind if you are keen on one of these. Pagani design logo etched into that little butterfly clasp there too. No surprises whatsoever that when I turn this one over and show you the movement, it is a Seiko NH35 24 jewel hacking and hand winding automatic. This staple of pretty much everything under about 400 USD. I've had this one on the time grapher. It's coming in about plus 10 seconds per day, which is perfectly within tolerances. Display case back, screw on, and nicely finished there with the usual spec sheet around the outer edges. Now let's go macro and have a look at the dial and the handset. No points for originality here, but then again, that's not the point today. It's supposed to look like the Aqua Terra, and it pretty much does. Pronounced larger indices at the 12, the 6 and the 9, and slightly smaller arrowheads everywhere else. That isn't actually what you find on the Omega. On the Omega, they're all the same all the way around. I've already talked about the date at the 3 o'clock. Hey, that's okay. It would have been nice to have been colour matched as well, but you're probably not getting a colour matched date wheel for less than $100, to be honest. Pagani Design applied logo above the pinion with the Pagani Design name printed in white, and automatic water resistant 10 bar 100 meters of water resistance printed underneath the pinion. 3 lines of text, and you've got Japan movement either side of the marker at 30, where Swiss made normally resides on the Omega. The handset is trying its best to look like exactly the same hands as you'll find on an Aqua Terra. You've got that slightly short hour hand as a consequence, quite a long minute hand with that pronounced arrowhead tip, and a lovely diamond tipped second hand, but the hands are very flat and very plain compared to the ones on the Omega. Like I said, it is harder for companies to copy an Omega than it is to copy a Rolex. And on wrist it wears exactly how I was expecting it to, i.e. it wears like a slightly larger version of the watch that I've had in my collection for the last few years. Those high polished center links definitely attract fingerprints, so have a polishing cloth handy if that is a problem for you. And it is fairly flat, there's not much downturn from the lugs, so it wears, I think, slightly larger than the dimensions suggest. I'm definitely calling this one as a 41 rather than a 40. 46mm lug to lug and an inverted mid link at the end link, though, means, you know, even if you've got a smaller wrist than I have, it's not going to be an issue. Legibility, on the other hand, is a bit of an issue with this one. I'm sure you've seen already. Depending on the angle that I hold it at, plenty of kind of bounce back, plenty of flecto from that sapphire crystal. I don't think there's any anti-reflective undercoating there. Some angles it's okay, some angles, those hands, the silver hands against the black dial, grey dial in this case, just vanish. They virtually disappear, so it is not the most legible of watches, to be honest. And you can see that when I take it outside as well. Spots of rain on the sapphire today. How very dare it is the middle of winter in Sydney after all, I suppose, though. On wrist, yeah, I don't think it looks like a $100 watch. It looks a lot more expensive than it does. And if I show you down the wrist, you can see what I mean. Compact lug to lug, but quite flat case profile. Pocket shot to finish today. Now, as mentioned, no half link, so you're going to be wearing this one loose. 135, 140 grams is not an awful lot though, and it is quite comfortable. No sharp edges on the underside of the case. So, for approximately 2% of the purchase price of the Omega then, how close does the Pagani get? Are there any areas where I think it is reasonably close to the Omega? And are there any areas, on the other hand, where I think it just doesn't get anywhere near? Well, for $100 or just under $100, I think overall the look is quite similar. I appreciate I have brushed out these links, otherwise they would be high polished as well. Usual specs that we've come to expect from Pagani at this price: sapphire crystal, Seiko movement, screw down crown, a decent level of water resistance. The Omega only has 150 meters, by the way, and a good looking bracelet. I think it is a viable alternative to Seiko 5s and anything else you can pick up for less than $100 if you're okay with a homage. Plus, I don't think people will identify this one as a homage watch nearly as often as they will spot a Rolex. The Aqua Terra has been around for 20 years now, but it is not nearly as common as a Datejust or a Submariner or even the Explorer 2 on people's wrists or in their imaginations. It's just not a watch that is out there and on the public horizon as much as any Rolex is, to be honest. And as discussed, the overall standard of case finishing on the Pagani is very reasonable for the price and very similar in look and feel to the Omega. But there are areas where it falls short. Let's start with the lume. It's the Omega on the left this time and the Pagani on the right. Clearly different colour tones. The Omega uses BGW9 and the Pagani, I'm guessing, is C3 or the equivalent, given that green look. Initially the Pagani looks like it's doing okay for itself, given that it's hamstrung by the slightly odd hand layout on the Omega in the first place. The Omega is not the easiest watch to read after dark. It's certainly not dive watch legible, that's for sure. However, when I crank up the speed, I don't even need to get to the halfway point. when you see what a disappointment the Pagani is. Those hands have gone, they vanish, and the indices are not too far behind them. It's rare to find a watch with decent lume for less than 100, and I haven't found it here. And I've alluded to this a couple of times over the course of the video, the anti-reflective treatment on the Omega Aqua Terra is the best I have seen on any watch at any price. It is absolutely sensational. Half the time it doesn't even look like there's a piece of glass covering the dial at all. The anti-reflective treatment on the Pagani doesn't exist. At all. There is none. Oh well. And the hands and the indices on the Omega are beautiful, multifaceted, different finishes, they are just gorgeous. The hands and the indices on the Pagani are really pretty simple by comparison. I mean, they can replicate the overall look, but that handset is nothing special, just plain flat bits of metal to be honest, and when I show you them on the macro, you can see rough edges. But my biggest complaint overall about the Pagani is the bracelet, so often the Achilles heel of Pagani design watches. No half links as mentioned, so chances are you're going to be wearing it loose. The butterfly clasp is pretty cheap and there is quite a lot of rattle, bit of a gap there between that first link and the clasp mechanism. Now there's also a bit of flexibility on my Omega, but not nearly as much as on the Pagani. And the Pagani may have screw links, but they were not easy to adjust at all. I really struggled with a couple of these. And look, this isn't my first rodeo. If I'm struggling, then I'm guessing a lot of people are going to be struggling when sizing this bracelet. I would much rather have push pins done well than screw links done badly. So overall then, this one is pretty much what I've come to expect from Pagani. Zero originality, incredible specs, incredible value for money, and a watch that looks far more expensive than it is. A reasonable approximation of the original watch, but once you start to dig a little deeper, you can see where they've saved their pennies, and you can see some of the quality control issues, particularly around that bracelet. If the Aqua Terra is your dream watch, but you just cannot justify spending that amount of money on it, and you're planning to put it straight onto a leather strap, then this one comes highly recommended. On the bracelet, I'm a little bit iffy just because of how difficult those screw links were for me to remove. So there you have it, another value-packed Pagani design with zero originality. Well done for making it to the back end of the video. If you like this head-to-head, why not watch the one between the Pagani and the Explorer 2? Or why not watch my 3-year roller coaster journey with the Aqua Terra? Thanks for watching, I'll see you all soon.